Hey there, welcome to episode 96 of the Quaggling Sand audio program. I'm your host, Dan Hugo. I'm recording this at 11:25 in the morning on Wednesday, September 10th, 2025. We publish on Wednesdays, so perfect timing. Today's topic and title, Why Coffee? You could ask, it could have a question mark, but it doesn't because it's a statement, why coffee? If you're not familiar with the Quaggling Sand audio program, if this happens to be the first one you are listening to, this episode of this audio program, well, welcome. Sort of a surprise, I think. Episode 96, you got some catching up to do. These are stories, they're tales, they're recollections. Maybe you'll find something useful or interesting. They are not intended to be interview style. I don't anticipate ever having a guest on, but maybe, who knows. But probably solo audio essays would be the way to describe this audio program. So welcome, however you landed here, or if you've been listening the whole time, great, even better. Quaggling sand is itself a technical term that I coined when I was very young. You probably refer to it in layman's terms, the old pins and needles. It's the return of circulation to usually a limb, your hand, your foot, maybe an arm or a leg, maybe your head, who knows. If you've been sleeping funny, if you've been sitting on your foot, if you've been resting on your arm, whatever the case may be. So as that circulation returns, quaggling sand is what you are experiencing. So quaggling sand, the audio program, the audio essays, the stories, the recollections, that's what you're here for. Hopefully wherever you found this audio program, you're able to locate the episode description. It is more interesting, perhaps, in the past couple of weeks. We have a few more places you can find this audio program. Hopefully you found it via YouTube or Apple Podcasts or Amazon Podcasts or Spotify, or maybe an RSS feed that has been captured by other platforms, or maybe you subscribe to the RSS feed directly. Who knows? There is a Quaggling Sand website now, so let's cover that in the link section. But wherever you did find this audio program, there's an episode description to be had. It contains show notes, which do contain a one-sentence summary, which I'll read, and then those links, which we'll get to in a moment. The show notes are thus. I have talked about coffee in a previous episode, maybe more than one. Mostly my enjoyment of not only consuming it, but also making it. But this time we add in the backstory, the why. The links, I've adjusted them a little bit. So the profile page linking everything is still at buymeacoffee.com/DanHugo. You are not encouraged to actually spend any money. You can if you want. There are affiliate links on that profile page that point to my various favorite coffee beans, usually available from Amazon, and a few other things that I actually use. So if you'd like to support my various efforts, you can follow one of those affiliate links that cost you nothing extra. You can contribute to the coffee fund directly at either buymeacoffee.com/DanHugo or ko-fi.com/DanHugo, ko-fi.com/DanHugo. We'll get to that in a second. The Buy Me an Update audio program, it's an update, 5 minutes or less, published on Monday mornings. It was initially published exclusively on Buy Me a Coffee, buymeacoffee.com/DanHugo/posts. So if you found the Dan Hugo profile page, you can find the posts linked from there, published every morning. Every Monday morning. I was finding that not having an RSS feed or usual normal accepted ways to get to an audio program was probably a problem. So now Buy Me an Update is available on YouTube, Amazon Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and it appears on the danhugo.com website. Now, all of these are available as links on the buymeacoffee.com/DanHugo profile page. There are links to all of my audio programs, various projects. All the audio programs have a homepage now that I own. The web design is something I also own, but it will improve. I just posted about that the other day, Monday, that I would really like to try Tailwind, if you're familiar with web design. So I need to spend some time on the actual design. The mechanical part is there. So the website is there. works just fine. The links work, the DNS, the email, all that stuff. Everything's fine. It just has to look nicer, said the engineer, who's not an aesthetic designer. So you can find links to everything. buymeacoffee.com/DanHugo. You can find the Buy Me an Update originally and first posted at buymeacoffee.com/DanHugo/posts, and then available at the other places. Coffee Solo, ko-fi.com/DanHugo/posts is a random topic, random time. I don't have a schedule. I don't have a particular constraint on the content, the topics, etc. So those are just published whenever. Also linked from danhugo.com. Also available on Apple Podcasts, etc., etc. So both Buy Me an Update and Coffee Solo are published on their respective platforms first, and then same day, shortly after, in the greater expanse of podcast universe. And finally, the Quaggling Sand homepage for this very audio program, quagglingsand.com. You will, if you visit my other pages associated with my audio programs, find a very similar horrible design as I'm speaking right now. But that is high on my to-do list to get at least something visually appealing, at least a little bit. So form over function must be the word of the day for at least the near term. So let's get started so we can get finished on this humid and warming Wednesday here in Vegas. Coffee today. I've come to really enjoy the preparation and consumption of different kinds of coffee in different ways, to the point where I have a reasonable burr grinder, the Baratza Encore. It's basically the best, arguably the best entry level or like casual home user grinder. It doesn't try to be professional. It's also way better than, I think when I got it, I got it a long time ago. I think it was $200. Now I think they're $150 or maybe even less. Baratza has since been purchased by, what's the other company? They also make espresso machines. Totally spacing on the name. But anyway, they got purchased. There's a new Baratza Encore Pro or something. They've got the ESP, I think it is. They added in some different gears to make better adjustments possible for espresso grind sizes and whatnot. But still, the Baratza Encore, it's a good product, good line. So when I got that was kind of a game changer. So I have that, several preparation tools, including 3 mocha pots of different sizes, 2 French press pots, different sizes, 3 different types of pour-over devices, 2 Vietnamese fin, especially if you want to make a Vietnamese iced coffee, great. And a Flair Pro 2 for manual press espresso. That's really enjoyable, although I don't use it enough. And my daily driver, the classic AeroPress. That seems like a lot, but a lot of these devices can be had fairly cheaply. The AeroPress, probably the most expensive at like $40. You can get pour over for, I think a fin costs $10. Pour overs can be like $10 to $15. You can get them with filters. You can get metal screens. There's all sorts of possibilities. So the big investment really, and the one where anyone should spend their money, which I learned over the years, is the grinder. The grinder makes a ginormous difference. If you have a good grinder, you can prepare coffee for pennies after that. The grinder makes the big difference. I am reviewing products for Amazon as a member of their Amazon Vine program, VINE, Vine. And I have found that searching for coffee-related items is an interesting way to land on, well, some interesting items. Mugs, tools, silicone mats, metal filter baskets, and more. And some of them are like tangentially coffee-related. So every once in a while you'll see some oil. I think I just ordered some oil bottles that are good for like olive oil or something, or coffee syrups, right? So they get included in the coffee section. So yeah, you never know. I've come across some interesting items to add to the collection. Probably one of my favorite is the duster. It's like a little spring-loaded dome. It looks like one of those cake pop deals, like a little dome at the end of a stick. The dome is a hemisphere of solid and a hemisphere of grated, like with holes in it, grated. And so when you pull on the spring, you kind of squeeze it like a syringe almost. So you pull back the spring part and you can throw in some, say, powdered cocoa. And then you close it. And then when you got your coffee and you've put some cream in there, maybe you've frothed up some some half and half or some heavy cream or whatever you like to put in your coffee, you can dust some cocoa powder over it, and it's very nice. So that one I got for free from Amazon Vine, and I gave it a 5-star review because I use it all the time. Great. I will also say that yesterday I was recommended, there's a little recommendation page, a burr grinder with, I think it was 12 different settings. It was a $50 grinder, and I literally said, $50? That's not going to be a good grinder, and I don't need it. So I was tempted at first because I can always write a review and just say, it's not. But I was like, I don't want to take up the counter space. So coffee snob or practical? You be the judge. Have I become a coffee snob though? Well, since you brought it up, I can make coffee that I enjoy at home. And I've watched enough coffee YouTubers, Lance Hendrickson, James, what's his name? James Hoffman in England. There are more. There are a lot of coffee YouTubers actually. Morgan does some good shows now and then. I've found, what was I gonna say? And I've read enough. Okay, so I've watched the YouTubers and I've read enough articles, and I've found that I kind of have some idea of what goes on with dialing in and figuring out what tastes how and why. Okay, it's astringent. You got to do this. Oh, it's a little bit muddy. Got to do that, etc. I've had a very bad espresso in a coffee shop. I mean, undrinkable, and that's hard to do with. It's just a little bit of coffee. How could it be that bad? I have had bad coffee out and about while I'm, in a random coffee shop and whatnot. And I have made bad coffee as part of the learning process. So I think I just know at this point what I enjoy and what tastes not great to me. But one of the primary rules of coffee really is, and all the people I mentioned, all the YouTubers and everything, they will all say the same thing. If it tastes good to you, it is good for you. So they will always disclaim like, well, if you like it a little bit more muddy, or if you like it a little bit more astringent, that's for you. That's why you get to make your own coffee. You can make it exactly the way you want. So they just tell you how to make these adjustments and what to look for. So if you want it more or less of something, you adjust the grind size, you adjust the water temperature, you adjust the amount of water, etc. And hey, I did take chemical engineering in college, and I did enjoy that. So the whole process of making coffee sort of has a little Chem E involved. So yeah, if it tastes good to you, then it's good. My coffee might not taste great to someone else. Who knows? You may not like my coffee at all. So where it started though, and again, I talked a lot about my own coffee preparations and whatnot. So all those different pieces of equipment I mentioned, I've talked about those, but this is the backstory, I suppose. Where did it start? I was not a coffee drinker, not at all. I worked at McDonald's in high school and certainly made a lot of old school drip coffee. I can only imagine how bad that was. I can only imagine because I never tried it. All I did was open the bag of coffee grounds. There was both decaf and regular. So one is coffee and one is not. Dump it into a filter. Put it back in the kind of industrial fast food coffee drip machine and hit the button. That's it. I had no idea if it was any good or if it was bad. It was this is way before the McCafe of today, which I've also heard is pretty good, but also pretty bad. So it depends. But that's a vastly different thing. I have never tried it myself that I remember. Maybe I should someday. Who knows? They strike me as more Frappuccino side of the world, like a lot of stuff added to them, but I don't know. Honestly, the same was true of the urn of iced tea there at McDonald's. I'm sure it tasted awful because we would use water from the back sink to fill it with a few industrial tea bags tossed in, using some purified water. Probably would have made a huge difference with both the coffee and the tea, in my opinion, but who cares, right? We were just making minimum wage. No sense of what we were actually preparing and who had to deal with it. All through college, I did not actually try coffee. There was a coffee shop called The Coop, and some of my friends used to like to go to that coffee shop, so I would occasionally wander down there and say, hey, how's it going? Never really got into the coffee side of it, though. The closest I came was chocolate-covered espresso beans. I discovered these during my freshman year, and somebody who I think was at Ghirardelli in San Francisco, I said, oh, can I get some of those? And he said, oh, I'll get you a bag when I'm home. And he came back, and so we were down there in LA at Harvey Mudd, which I would snack on if I was preparing for a test or generally needed to stay awake and remain alert and attentive. As I have mentioned in previous episodes, staying awake was not a big deal, not a big challenge for me, but the focus was essential now and then. So if you're studying or if you got to read something or whatever, all chocolate covered espresso beans. So here again, the theme will be that my journey into coffee was clouded by chocolate and sugar and the marks of bad tasting coffee, which is usually ill prepared. In my final year of college, I discovered the Thai restaurant in Pomona, Sanam Luang, and would have endless Thai tea, Thai iced tea, and occasionally a Thai iced coffee. And these were good, but a ton of sugar and half usually. So cream and sugar. So I would not count these as legitimate tea or coffee beverages. Thai tea is good though. If you've ever made it, at some point I did purchase some loose leaf Thai tea and tried making it at home. It's kind of a challenge because it really helps to have like a cheesecloth to filter out the tea, the leaves. But it was good. That was a long time ago though. So for the first 3 years or so in Silicon Valley, I have to say I was also not a coffee drinker. I would head to this restaurant, Thai, for lunch pretty much daily, but some Thai I was still enamored with all things Thai. But they had some Thai iced tea there, and I actually watched them make it, and they showed me how to make it. So I did. That's around the time when I tried to make it myself. So I used to have Thai tea there like the old days, but I had not taken the plunge into a mug of coffee yet. Netscape had espresso machines in every kitchenette. So prior to my joining Netscape, I worked at Apple as a contractor twice, two different times in the Apple Quality and in the Newton Group, and at a German technology company on some smart card stuff in Los Gatos. I worked at Supermac, of course, at the beginning of my first tour in Silicon Valley, and TrueVision. When I was working for TrueVision, I went to Japan for a week on behalf of TrueVision, and it turns out meeting rooms with Japanese business people included cups of black coffee. I soldiered through it, but I was not a big fan. So that wasn't where I had my epiphany. When I joined Netscape, that was in about 96, sometime later in 96, with their glass front refrigerators full of free Mountain Dew and other beverages and whatnot, I thought nothing much of the commercial espresso machines in every kitchenette in our building, and probably in other buildings, probably in all of them. There was soda and other beverages all day. Why would I want to try to figure out how to make espresso? There might have been a drip coffee machine too. I honestly don't remember, because why would I? Well, as I started spending more and more time, including multi-day all-nighters of sorts, which I've talked about previously, within the halls of Netscape, I did try to figure out how to make an espresso, because I mistakenly believed that espresso would have a lot of caffeine. Now we know better. Pour over and something like immersion brews, because you spend more time extracting, you'll probably get a little bit more, but it's best to have a TDS, and you can actually measure a total dissolved solids meter, and you can determine how much of your coffee bean was dissolved into the water. So espresso is not it. The water passes through very quickly, and there you go. To make it much worse, I still did not enjoy coffee. And I say much worse because I literally placed some hot cocoa powder, which was also in the kitchenettes. There was tons and tons of, just stay inside the building. Here's some snacks. Here's some hot cocoa. Here's some, all the Mountain Dew, whatever, tons and tons, right? So literally place some of the hot cocoa powdered mix into the portafilter on top of the coffee. I've seen some people do this with, I think, brown sugar. They make sort of a Cuban espresso, I think it is. The hot water pressing through the puck with the sugar on it, I guess, does a little bit of magic. Can be pretty good. I've seen people do orange, a slice of orange packed into, that's weird. But this was under the mistaken belief that I would end up with some sort of chocolatey output. And if memory serves, and I haven't done this since then, so it's been a long time, but if memory serves, this was, it really was just a worse tasting espresso. It didn't really, it wasn't like, this tastes like a hot cocoa with coffee flavor. No, I do not recommend doing this. And by all means, avoid telling people if you do, because you're violating some law. So the coffee culture started to become part of my surroundings, I guess you could say. It was around this time at Netscape when I started hanging out with people. This was later after I had experienced my espresso ineptitudes. When I started hanging out with people who were coffee drinkers, going to Starbucks to hang out was a thing a little bit. But there were, because people would stay in the building, but there were also any number of coffee shops all over the South Bay Area and even up into San Francisco and the Bay Area in general. To do so, there was a really interesting multi-story house of sorts that had been converted into a coffee shop and sandwiches and music and hanging out and whatnot in the Saratoga area. And this is really, I mean, there were laptops, but this was before everybody was sitting in a coffee shop with their earbuds in their ears and doing whatever they're doing. So people would go there and socialize and hang out. So it was much more about having a coffee. It's long since closed. Unfortunately, that was a pretty cool spot, but they had a certain amount of personality there, and that's generally true of the indie spots, independent. And with various Netscape people working from home in San Francisco with their ISDN lines and whatnot, it was not uncommon to head up there. And occasionally, for example, I would end up in North Beach, and we would have a coffee. And North Beach is famously Italian leaning, so some nice coffee shops, but other places as well. I have to admit, aside from the rare attempt to acquire a taste for a North Beach espresso or similar, I leaned much more toward coffee drinks, like the infamous Frappuccino, of course, not legitimately coffee, more of a milkshake. I was slowly but surely acquiring a taste for coffee, but emphasis on slowly, but not yet fully appreciating the different kinds of beans and preparations and whatnot, to be sure. There was no rush per se, but yeah, Frappuccino doesn't really count as coffee, let's be honest. My final stop on my first tour of Silicon Valley, I was working for Leapfrog Toys in Los Gatos. It was a little bit of a drive. I want to say it was like probably 15 miles. It would take me like 30 to 45 minutes to get there, depending on traffic. And there was a Starbucks drive-through near where I lived. So at the beginning of my journey to get to work at that site, I was a consultant. So technically I didn't have to go to that place, but that's where the hardware was for the toy. So the Starbucks drive-through very near where I lived. So I would stop in there every morning, get a venti Frappuccino, like chocolate chip or something ridiculous. Like, what is that? 95% sugar and ice and whatnot, and a shot or two of actual coffee. Pff, come on. What better way to pass the time than sip on I wrote grande, but I venti. It was definitely a venti because it was that ridiculous. Nobody should be drinking that much Frappuccino. I can type. Venti chocolate or chocolate chip Frappuccino milkshake. Sort of a travesty looking back, but this was the first place where going to downtown Los Gatos for a coffee was a thing during lunch or just to take a break. So this is where work and, hey, you want to go grab a coffee, sort of intermingled. Before that, I was not working at a place where people would tend to go for a coffee break. And while I was still not a true convert, the repetition was something. So just, it was just a thing. And like, even when I worked at UMax, they were, that was after Netscape. They were much more inclined to go out for lunch, but not, or we would walk across the street to Great America during the summer with our summer pass. And we didn't go there to drink coffee. We went there to ride on the rides and go back to work. So I was not in a sort of coffee break culture until Leapfrog. That was kind of the beginning of that. And then I would leave the Bay Area to go back to Phoenix. So while I was in Phoenix for my respite, I moved back for 4 years. And while I did not spend a lot of time hanging out with people in social settings, it's kind of a lot of time in my a lot of time watching 9/11 coverage, which was another waste of time. But I did now and then get out and about, and I found a couple of nice coffee shops here and there to continue the transition, albeit very slowly. There was an interesting spot, a bit of a drive from where I lived, called the Cave Creek Coffee Company. This was another independent place with personality as opposed to the Starbucks that I could visit if I happened to be at the Desert Ridge Mall, for example. There were 3 Starbucks in that mall. A standalone shop, one in a grocery store, and I think it was like an Albertsons, and then one in a bookstore. I think that was Barnes and Noble. This seemed humorous to me at the time, but later in San Francisco, I would walk by like along a building as I was walking in the city. There was a Starbucks at the corner, and then I was walking along the building, and then there was a Starbucks at the next corner, but the same building. So the one building had two Starbucks on the sidewalk side on either corner. So no surprises. It was during this time in Phoenix that Starbucks was offering the Chantico, the drinking chocolate drink, which was kind of decadent. If you've ever been to Torino, you know that the Bicharin is a much better version of this. You should try it out. But the Chantico drinking, it was a truffle, whatever, and it was yet more distraction from consuming proper coffee. I kind of liked them. I probably had like 3 or 4 of them ever, and then they stopped making them. So much of Starbucks is drinks that include coffee, but which offer some distraction. So like, oh, give me this ginormous 30, what is it? No, Venti's 20 ounce. Give me 20 ounces of beverage with 2 ounces of coffee in it. So yeah, it's bringing the non-coffee drinkers like me at the time into the store. This would change, of course, but so much sugar and chocolate and whipped cream and whatnot, it doesn't really count. It's really mad. And what I've found out over the years is essentially if you come across someone who's like, oh, I gotta have 25 sugars and a quart of cream in my coffee, somebody's making you very bad coffee, because coffee, oh, it's usually too bitter. Well, yeah, because they're making it wrong. If somebody's making you bitter coffee or a coffee that tastes muddy or whatever, again, you got to dial it in. You got to learn how to work that grinder or what's going on with your grind in general. If you're purchasing ground coffee, yeah, you got to work that out, because a good tasting coffee can be made, and you really shouldn't have to add much of anything to it. It may be an acquired taste in general on its own, but it shouldn't taste bad. Like you have to mask the flavor entirely. That's something's not right there. So I moved back to the Bay Area for my second tour. I've talked about that in a previous episode. I worked at Salon, salon.com, the magazine based in San Francisco. It was based on Mission and, I can't remember the cross street, but it was on Mission and where the Rincon Center is, wherever that is, like under the Bay Bridge. This was a catalyst. Oh, I'm sorry. So I returned to the Bay Area, and I was catching the Caltrain every morning to head to the city. So I was awake a lot. I could take a nap on the train. I've talked about this before, but this was a catalyst with an industrial drip coffee machine that eventually I would load up as the first person in the morning. I would get there around 7 and 7 or 7:30, somewhere at 7:20, 7:15, somewhere in there. So I was the first one in the door. I would crack open so here again, we have the prepared dosage of coffee that's brought in by coffee service. The machine is industrial, commercial, it's big. It can prepare coffee for an entire office, but it was not good. So industrial drip coffee, loaded it up, made the coffee, and it was really bitter. And there wasn't really much to adjust on this thing. So it had a burn flavor to it, which I really did not like. But everybody kind of grown accustomed to it, and they would just add some sugar or whatever. And so you're like, okay. This led to more outings to Pete's Coffee down the street, for example. Though several of my San Francisco colleagues were more fans of indie shops, so we would go find a coffee shop here or there. Pete's was okay. Starbucks was less okay. Pete's was just recently acquired by some company that I don't remember, but an end of an era, perhaps. The transition for myself into the coffee world continued. One day we stumbled upon a mention of the company that makes the Aero Bee flying rings for competitive Frisbee games. They were going to be launching a coffee making device called the AeroPress. We had been speaking in the kitchen area where that coffee machine was about the coffee our machine there was spitting out and how it wasn't that great, and maybe giving a mocha pot a try or whatever, like trying different and stuff you could actually bring into the office. A mocha pot and a hot plate would be sufficient, for example. And talking about this odd AeroPress idea that had just come out like mentioned. I don't even know if it was available yet, but it was available to read about. And writer Farhad Manjoo, in his early days, he would go on to become much more famous, maybe even infamous. Farhad was wandering by, heard this, and suggested he would contact them to obtain one for a review, which he did. and it was good. He brought it into the office and we all tried it, tried making coffee and whatnot. And it was noticeably better to be able to control. Now, I think we probably started out with the coffee that we were putting into this drip machine. So whatever the grind was and whatnot, but you could actually adjust the water temperature and you could have it steep for a second and whatever. And this was not using inverted techniques or whatever. This was, version 1 of the AeroPress. So, but immediately a better taste. So I would pick up an AeroPress when they became available and began my experimenting with home coffee preparation a little bit. I cannot say that I actually did any sort of deep dive to learn what tasted better when I would adjust water temperature, water ratio, grind size, different types of beans, all this stuff. So there was still a lot to learn, and I think the AeroPress has been basically the same price. So something like $40, 30, 29, 39, I think it was $39 for your basic version 1 AeroPress. So there are a lot of cities along the Caltrain route. Caltrain running up and down the peninsula stopped in several cities. The nature of railways in general, the cities will sprout up along the way. The Caltrain route was based on train tracks from decades earlier. So some old towns that have been around for a while: Sunnyvale, founded by the Murphy family; Redwood City, Palo Alto, Menlo Park, all of them, all the way up to King Street Station, 4th and King in San Francisco. At the time when I was writing, that would change before then and after then and so on. But I would occasionally catch the train on the weekend since I had my monthly pass to go to work. And so I'd visit cities I never really thought about in my first tour. I never really hung out in Redwood City or Hillsdale. Hillsdale had Hillsdale Mall with the parking lot that was connected to the stop. So the stop was at the other end of the mall parking lot. So I could just go to the mall parking lot. To the train stop, go to the mall for a while and then go back home. So if I wanted to go out and just get out of the house on the weekend, piece of cake. Stopping for a coffee now and then was yet more continuation down this path of coffee realization. There was still too much Starbucks. Starbucks in the mall, much more likely than finding an independent coffee shop, but you could find them. Especially, I was living in the city of Sunnyvale, another of the Caltrain track cities, where I lived, and indeed a Caltrain city, to be sure, like I just said. I really should read ahead a little bit. It was lousy with independent coffee shops, just a very short walk from the train station. And the train station itself was a very short walk, even shorter a walk from where I was living. It's one of the reasons I chose this spot where I was living, because it was available when I needed to move back to Sunnyvale. And I figured, if I'm going to be taking the train up to the city, I may as well live something like a 5-minute walk. So that worked out great. So stopping, okay. So there were three. So downtown Sunnyvale was right on the other side of the train tracks for me. There were 3 coffee shops on Murphy Avenue just over those tracks. 2 of them used heavily by laptop warriors like myself, working on their next big thing when I would eventually become a laptop warrior. One of the coffee shops was actually attached to it was more of a catering company. So the coffee shop was like, their coffee's okay. They pushed sandwiches much more. But the 2 other coffee shops were just great. They were good places to spend the day. I found myself hanging out in these 2, especially later as I began to work on various startup ideas, until it became clear that seeing the same people each day made for more socializing than working. And that brought me back to working more from home and then going to the coffee shops now and then. As this was around the time when I was testing out being car-free, or carefree if you like, I would now and then jump on the Caltrain and head to, say, Mountain View for Red Rock Coffee, or one or two other spots that were near the station there, or maybe up to Redwood City, or all the way to SF, or even down to San Jose. There would be a couple of places that were reasonable walking distance from the Diridon station and whatnot. So why not? I was beginning to prefer independent coffee shops as they had much more personality. They were generally friendlier people working there. This was probably because it was just a smaller total staff, or running into the same people working at each made for more conversational engagements. But they were working and I was also working. So unlike hanging out at a coffee shop with the same customers, you could visit different independent coffee shops and kind of, hit a couple different spots, different days, and you would see the same group of people working, but you, depending on the time and whatnot, you may not see the same people customer side. So you could have conversations. You could, hey, how's it going? How's the thing coming? What are you working on? Whatever. But they had work to do. I had work to do. So it was a little bit better combination for purposes of getting things done than sitting in a coffee shop socializing, which is far too easy to do. So at this point, we can fast forward a little bit. I've jumped around on the timeline toward the end here. We can add in the Palm story. Palm had a double commercial espresso machine in Building 3 where we were working on the pre. And while it did not work great, it was in need of like an overhaul, which somebody tried to do, but it just got worse. It did work to compress hot water. The boiler functioned and it would spit water out. It just needed more tuning to get a consistent water flow and water temperature control and so on. But it worked well enough, and I was much more inclined to make an espresso there that was closer to real espresso than my cocoa concoctions at Netscape. However, our whole team was way more inclined to head out to Pete's, for example, for coffees, which would also be true for the small subset that landed at Jawbone later. So a few of us that were, had moved over to Jawbone. Anybody want to go for a coffee? And so we would pile into somebody's car and bring some back for those who didn't go with us and so on. So social coffee to get out of the office was even more of a thing for my second tour of duty in Silicon Valley. And Pete's was slightly closer to an independent shop compared to Starbucks, sort of. Although going to independent shops was generally preferred if you were going there to hang out. But just going for a coffee, Pete's was usually the preferred way to go. I had discovered food trucks about halfway through my second tour of Silly Valley, and there were coffee food trucks among others. So you could definitely get your coffee on, even mobile. Now that I knew a bit more about different coffees and I would watch the preparation from a different angle, because usually they would open up the side doors on a kind of like a classic sandwich truck, right? Remember the old days of usually it was like a chrome shiny and it had doors on the sides they would open, and then the person would be standing there and they would turn around and reach into the truck, or it had displays of chips and snacks and whatnot. So the back was usually where they'd have the espresso machine, and there would be, syrups and snacks and whatnot. So they would have a full-on coffee shop counter, but in the truck. So the person would be standing outside of the truck. So you would be standing behind them and you could see what they were doing. You would actually watch them. So as if you were standing behind the counter over the shoulder of a barista. So you could get a different view of like, oh, okay, I see what they're doing there. So useful. So little by little, Starbucks was becoming a sort of a third choice if that option was needed, with so many more interesting and arguably better places starting in walking distance from home and even from work. So the notion of like, do I need to go to Starbucks when there's, 5 better or at least more interesting coffee shops between here and there? I could walk to a couple of them. I can walk. Now, Palm didn't have a coffee shop that was so easy to walk to. So a little bit of a drive there, but where did I work? Somewhere else I worked. You could, there were good choices anywhere. Not Starbucks. I was still only barely making coffee at home at this point, though, because I was going to work and we'd have social coffees and whatnot. I would get home in the evening, and I was like, oh, I'm not going to make a coffee in the evening. Little did I know I would eventually do that. There was an awful phase with the discs and the pods and whatnot, which was pure laziness, really. So I had a couple of different machines that you'd pop in a thing and fill a water reservoir and it would do its thing. And those are just awful. You should never use those. My first sampling, somewhere in there, my first sampling of Turkish coffee, there was this restaurant called Dish Dash that was sort of commingled Middle Eastern cuisine, and they had a nice Turkish coffee and a kunefe. So they leaned Turkish on those. Learned how to make it at home and whatnot. Am I leaning more into the AeroPress, though I did not really have a coffee grinder to really figure out that how that would work. I would get a hand grinder that I kind of used, but I didn't know what I was doing. So Turkish coffee you get pre-ground because mostly you can't grind it fine enough to meet the stringent Turkish coffee specifications. So finally, we're in the last section. So I moved to Vegas. I've talked about that in my early days in Vegas and some of my world travels when I was working for Intel Corporation. So a combination of moving to Vegas and then traveling around the world a little bit. So I'll touch on two things there. I've talked about both of those a lot. So Vegas has a rather substantial selection of independent coffee shops. From where I live, I can walk to, it'd be a longer walk, like a mile, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 7. I'm going to say 7. I'll call it 7. These would be longer walks. I could jump on a bus if I really wanted to. Maybe I'm going to go with 8 because there is a Grouchy John's near me. So I think they have 2 or 3 locations around the area. So that's just walking distance from where I am. Now there's a Starbucks standalone. There's a Starbucks inside the Smith's grocery store. There's a Starbucks near some of the other places I've mentioned. So if I walk a little bit farther, I'm going to encounter, there's a Dutch Brothers that's a long walk away from here. So there are several options that are not Starbucks, and there are Starbucks. But yeah, Vegas actually has a fairly substantial independent coffee culture, which is noteworthy. I don't know if it gets the attention it deserves. There are a few that are leaving their mark here, like Mothership has, I think she has 3 or 4 locations. She's received some accolades. Very entrepreneurial person running that place, a lot of community involvement and whatnot. And there's Vesta Coffee, which does do some really good roasting. The owner is kind of annoying, but such is life. And a few others that are really solid. They're good spots. And a few others that are maybe hanging on, but still offer something other than the canned Starbucks experience. So there's a full range. There are places that focus more on pastry and food and coffee. So they make good coffee, but they draw a full, restaurant style crowd. There are places that are really leaning into the, hey, why don't you work from our coffee shop area and just sit there with your earbuds and don't socialize. That's kind of annoying, but we got that. And then when I was traveling around for Intel, I, of course, had opportunities, especially in Italy a couple of times, to try some nice Italian coffee, for example, or coffees prepared by people in different places, and coffee on the go in those different places, coffee in different airport lounges even. Some if you're in the nicer lounges and the international travel lounges, they're going to spend a little bit more on the barista and the coffee. They're pretty good. They were good. I was flying through Switzerland, and they had Lindt chocolates all over the place, and you could get a really nice coffee and have a nice little chocolate truffle thing or whatever with it if you want. So very nice. Sometimes I had to stay awake for a hackathon or whatever. If I had not been a coffee convert at that point, it probably was going to happen just because I was always on the go, and coffee is a really convenient thing to have at your disposal. It was the pandemic lockdown, however, that actually swung me to the rest of the journey, the rest of the way down, kind of kicked me down the path the rest of the way to home preparation and actually learning how to adjust coffee to taste. I had a hand grinder. I got a better one, and later I got a Baratza Encore when I had a consulting gig somewhere in there. With some consulting money, got the Flair Pro 2 so I could make an espresso but not spend $500 on a boiler machine. Double boilers, those are that much more expensive. The prices on home espresso machines, like automated machines, has come down a bit, but at this point, the AeroPress, I had I had a gooseneck kettle. I don't think I had a scale yet. I might have had a scale somewhere in there. So the tools of the trade become easier and easier to make use of to try different styles of coffee. So the Flair Pro 2, pretty cool, but it's old by today's standards. There's no heater. So you basically preheat with hot water and et cetera, et cetera. I had the AeroPress and a few of these other preparation methods I mentioned, and I've acquired more of them over the years. They can be had quite reasonably. So the grinder is the big expense. And if you're going to get an espresso machine, that's probably a bigger expense. They can compete depending on how much you want to spend. You can spend as much money as you want to spend. The Baratza Encore basically is the baseline for, so you want to get started, but you want to use something that will actually make really good grinds from different sizes and whatnot. So that's generally, the 80% crowd will say, oh, the Baratza Encore is a great, excellent price performance and so on. So that's my 2 cents advice there. So if you do have a nice grinder, an AeroPress is easy to start with, or pour overs. If you want to get a manual espresso machine, those are quite reasonable compared to an automated one. So I was going down that road of like, oh, okay, now I kind of understand how to make it taste better. I understand what the crema is and why, all that. Very nice. So today, I rarely imagine visiting a coffee shop for coffee unless there's a meetup of some sort, if I'm going to meet someone or if there's some sort of a gathering there. I make coffee that I enjoy quite a bit right here at home. So all of this coffee journey, why coffee? It was really socializing at work. So it wasn't like I need to have my coffee in the morning. It was much more about like, this is a social thing. People want to go out and have a coffee, or they're milling around. And by the way, when I was at Philips in Eindhoven, having a coffee, I think I mentioned this when I talked about this previously. They had a coffee vending machine, and it was 25 a quarter. It was a quarter for a coffee, 0.25 guilders or florins. If you're a Princess Bride fan, now you know what the two sides were. They were Dutch money. So they would get up. They would, hey, you want to go have a coffee? You want to have a coffee? So they'd all get up and they'd go to their little kitchenette area, and they had a coffee vending machine. They'd plunk in their quarters. So at 0.25, it's still a quarter, even in Holland. Plunk in the quarter, get the little cup of coffee, and they'd just stand around and have their coffees, and then they would be done and they would walk back to their office. I found the same exact thing when I was at the Arduino office in Turin, take your pick. They would all get up and go to a coffee vending machine and have a quick espresso from a vending machine. In that case, they had some sort of magic tokens or whatever, so it was quote unquote free. But in Holland, I said, how come you guys don't have like we have coffee pots with drip coffee. You can go have coffee all day at Philips and it's just free. And they said, we experimented with free coffee, but people would just go get a coffee and they'd go back to their desk. So here it's much more deliberate, and it becomes like a coordinated social break. Like, hey, let's all take a break and we'll go and we'll talk about whatever, talk about the weather or talk about work or whatever the topics are. And so you're literally and explicitly getting up from your desk together, and you're going to a different place and having to spend money. It's a quarter, not much, but it's just a ritual, a deliberate act. And so coffee really, in a workplace, takes on that appeal as a kind of a synchronization mechanism and socializing and whatnot. At the same time, it's a really cheap hobby if you want to get into something where you can actually you can learn how to make it. You can learn how to make it better. You can learn how to make it in different styles. You can become a fan of different styles of bean, of different roasting methods. You can become a fan of like Ethiopian coffee, which is typically roasted right before you grind it. Maybe you like Turkish coffee. Maybe you like iced coffee, whatever. You can prepare it. There's so many different ways to prepare and consume and make different concoctions out of it. And by comparison, it is a super cheap hobby. You can get into beer and wine and whiskeys and what else? Liqueurs. So these are more expensive hobbies for socializing, but it's really hard to beat the value proposition of coffee. You can get into tea, but tea is a little bit more based on the farm where it came from. There are some other subtleties, but really, if you're going to become a coffee snob, or if you're going to become interested in how the preparations work, if you lean towards engineering like I do, the chemical engineering components, the different parameters that you can adjust and whatnot, those are all kind of interesting and at the same time remarkably practical. So, and then being stuck at home for a year, whatever the pandemic silliness was, I can learn how to make coffee at home the way I want to make it, and then I can learn all the subtleties, and I can watch James Hoffman and various other YouTubers telling me how to make better coffee, and oh, look at that, it is better. So yeah, I rarely today I mentioned earlier, I have maybe 8 coffee shops that I could walk to if if I want to walk a bit of a distance. Yeah, I'm gonna say I'm walking at least a half a mile, but as much as a mile and a half to get to any of those 8, in different directions, obviously. But why? I can make coffee at home. And I can make coffee at home for pennies compared to what I might find in a coffee shop. So really, at the end of the day, if you go to a coffee shop, you are paying for the atmosphere, as the saying goes, the convenience for the meetup or the change of scenery, the tables, the chairs, the music playing, the ambiance. Especially if you work at home and you just want to change what you see and maybe interact with other human beings. It's all good. The coffee at that point is arguably free, sort of, but your mileage may vary. I like making coffee at home. I do very occasionally, very rarely go to a coffee shop, and again, usually to meet up. Here's a fun fact. If you're ever in Las Vegas and you think, it'd be fun is to take a break from spending all kinds of crazy money on my Vegas weekend. If only I could sit in a co-work style space and have cheap coffee, reasonably priced coffee, and use free Wi-Fi and just take it easy, check my mail. There is such a place. In the Fashion Show Mall, there is literally a Capital One co-work space. You can go in there. They don't hassle you. They don't try to sell you. They'll say, "Oh, hi, welcome to Capital One. Let me know if you have any questions." That's about the extent of their marketing, and then, like a greeter. And then you can go. There's a little coffee island in the middle, like a little coffee shop. The ownership has changed, so I think it's a different coffee shop. There have been 2 or 3 different options since I've gone there. I've only gone there about 5 times. You can get a coffee at a normal price, $5, $6, whatever, and they're nice and they're helpful and they're friendly and all that. And you go and you sit, and no one will bother you for the rest of the time you're there. Or you can go get another coffee if you want. Free Wi-Fi, do your thing, have a meeting, sit off in the corner by yourself. Inside the mall, who knew such utility existed for so little, but offering so much. And if you have a Capital One account, they'll give you coffee discount. I think it's 50% or something crazy. So everybody wins. But aside from things like this, if somebody said, "Hey, you want to go meet up at Starbucks?" I'd be like, is there somewhere more interesting, more better? But so yeah, from a social, and this is going back in time. That's why would you want to leave just to get out of the house, to get out of the office, to go intermingle, talk about the news of the day, whatever the case may be. But that is why coffee. I can't believe I talked for almost an hour. My clock says 56 minutes, so it'll probably be about 54 when I do a little post-production. That's where I'll leave it for today. Thank you for listening. As always, don't forget, quagglingsand.com is as fine a starting point as any, and go from there. Take it easy. Bye-bye.